This is Dashing Gans Olympic Adventures podcast for Aussie Home Loans to deal with anyone in Australia. They've got clients in every state and capital city, and they do Zoom as well. Their areas of expertise include purchasing a property, owner-occupied or investment, building a property portfolio, refinancing and debt consolidation. Our guest today is a high achiever in all areas of her life, especially when it comes to sport. She was a star hurdler as a junior and then got injured, and then virtually overnight became a champion rower and went on to win a silver medal in the sculls, the double sculls at the Olympic Games in 2012, and then won a gold medal in the single sculls after also winning a medal in the single sculls in 2012 at the 2016 Games, which of course were held in Rio de Janeiro. Had a lot of success with the Victorian Queen's Cup team as well in the eights, in the sweep rowing events as well. And she's been one of the greats of our sport over a 10 to 12 year period, and has also been involved in an administrative role where she was on the Athletes Commission when she was an athlete as part of the Australian Olympic Committee, and was going to go as the Deputy Chef de Mission to the 2020 Olympic Games, and then got put back a year, and then she went on to have her second child, but still very well thought after person when it comes to Olympic Games. I'm talking, of course, originally Kim Crow, now Kim Brennan. Kim, welcome to the program. Great to have you with us.
Thank you very much for having me.
You started in athletics and then you went into rowing. Was it a seamless transition?
I don't know about seamless. In fact, it definitely wasn't a seamless transition. When I first made the switch, I loved the culture of rowing and the passion of people who turn up to the Yarra River at 6 o'clock in the morning on freezing cold mornings when it's pouring with rain, and enjoy rowing because of the pure community and thrill of being out there on the water. But it wasn't something that came to me particularly naturally. I did spend a good amount of time falling into the Yarra River. I think something that you sometimes don't see when you watch rowing, it looks really easy from the outside. Those boats are really tippy. And so it's a little bit like golf. The harder you try, often the worse you go. It's all about, it's about rhythm, it's about feel, it's about patience, about all of these things that, probably are not my strength. And so it was a real learning curve in taking the, I guess, the motivation and the commitment and the ability to train hard and work really hard and push my physical limits, and understand that this sport actually also required the ability to be patient and to listen to the water and to feel what the boat was doing, and to learn the art of it, not just the physiology. So it was quite a transition, but one that I really enjoyed as I came to get to know the wonderful rowers, and also what the boat feels like when it runs really well along the water.
Was the Yarra dirtier than you thought it was, Kim?
Oh, it is just as rotten as you would ever expect. The litter traps are called litter traps for a reason. It is, it is not a great place to fall in. But unfortunately, it's also a little bit like the more you try not to fall in, the more you actually fall in. So I probably should have just focused on trying to row well, and I might have been better at staying in my boat.
You certainly achieved a lot very quickly. We'll get to that in a second. I mentioned earlier you're a star junior in the 400 metres hurdles. That looked like it was going to be the career you were going to take. You were second in Australia behind the great Jana Pittman, and then you got injured. So when you say it was a seamless transition, did you choose rowing to help your injury, or did you choose rowing because it was something you just wanted to do?
Great question. So I actually, I'd had surgery on my navicular. So it's the bone at the top of the foot. And I came out of that surgery, and the surgeon told me that the surgery wasn't successful. So they weren't able to repair the bone. And he said, look, you're not going to be able to run again at the top level. It won't be able to withstand that kind of training and impact, and that was that. So I was rehabbing the foot in the gym, and at the time the VIS were running a talent identification program, and so I went through the testing for that. I got talent ID'd for 3 sports, which were canoe kayak, beach volleyball and water polo. And it just so happened that at the same time as I did that talent ID testing, the rowing program were running a talent ID program as well. I didn't get picked for that program, but I did know a number of the rowers and the rowing coaches from my time training in the VIS gym, and I'd always admired how hard they work and how much fun they seemed to have when they were training. And I think they saw, oh, you know, she's tall, she trains hard, and so they invited me to join in that program that they were running. And I think as the first people that showed a real interest, I was part of a cohort of 4 women and 4 men at Melbourne University Boat Club, who went through that talent ID program, and it was a great experience to be able to throw myself in the deep end of a new sport and become a part of a new community. And I think about 3 or 4 months after I started rowing, I had the opportunity to compete for the university at the University Games, which was a huge amount of fun and taught me a lot about how much joy you can get in a team sport like rowing. And I was pretty hooked from there to just become as good as I could be in that sport. So, I mean, if it wasn't for the injury, I don't think I ever would have found rowing. And I think if it wasn't for the timing of some of the key coaches and athletes who were around the VIS at that time, it certainly wasn't a sport that was a big part of my life growing up.
You were talking about, obviously, the talent identification program, and Kim Brennan, Australian Olympic gold medalist in rowing in the Single Sculls in 2016, is my guest on Dashing Down's Olympic Adventures podcast for Aussie Home Loans. And one of the sports you were identified in to get involved in, seeing your hurdling career was over, was beach volleyball. I would have thought that would have been hard on your foot injury, even though it was on sand.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think it probably wouldn't have been a great choice. I think that the hope was that the impact of landing on sand would be better than landing on a track post a hurdle. But just the amount of jumping and running involved in a sport of that athleticism, I think would have been pretty tough.
So as soon as you got into rowing, as you said, you started having success with Melbourne University, and then the Victorian rowing team came calling, and you were part of the Queen's Cup. We know how big the King's Cup was for men, and Victoria dominated that for many years. And then the women's crew started dominating that as well, and you were part of that very quickly. So you were becoming a star overnight in a very short space of time, Kim.
I think I was pretty fortunate at the Melbourne University Boat Club at that time. So there were a couple of things going on. One was Peter Anthony, who was a gold medalist in the Double Sculls in 1992. He was the club president at the boat club and was always out there. And he, if I asked, can I go for a row with you? Can we take out a double scull? He'd always say yes. And so the ability to learn from, the best in the world was incredible. The other thing was we had a coach, Ian Wright, who Kiwi by nature, but he had built out a really strong squad, and I'd often turn up when the men were training, and if they couldn't fill the boat, just ask to jump in the bow seat of the men's crew, because there's no better way to learn a sport than to learn from people who are better than you, stronger than you, faster than you, and it really tests your reflexes and your skills and your ability to really move a boat. So the opportunity to row with people better than me from a very early stage of my rowing career, I think I was really fortunate about. A lot of athletes who come through the school rowing programs Coaches at school rowing are often ex-students who did well at school rowing, but maybe were never world class. And I think a lot of athletes pick up some bad habits through the school programs through no fault of the schools. But I was very fortunate to be learning right from the moment I started from the best of the best, and I think that really accelerated my learning in the sport.
So obviously you learned both disciplines of rowing, the sweep rowing and the scull rowing. Did you have a preference of where you'd like to concentrate, or you were just willing to do both to give yourself a better chance of being selected if the opportunity came to represent Australia down the track?
I initially really focused on sweep rowing, and I think that was just the timing of where I started. And there's something really special about rowing an 8. The energy and the just the noise and the challenge of getting an 8 going well was really exciting, and so I did love that sweep rowing. I picked up sculling much later in my career, so I actually, a good few years into my rowing career, I was doing a work placement at the Court of Arbitration for Sport in Lausanne in Switzerland, and that was for a good 3-month period. And so I didn't have anyone to row a sweep boat with while I was there. So I needed to learn to scull to be able to keep up my training, and so I did a good few months of learning to scull properly on Lake Geneva. And then, came back and focused in on sculling for the next few years, and found that there was, really beautiful dynamics in getting a double to go well, getting a quad to move, and then ultimately, the real challenge of a single scull where it's just you, and really learning how to get that boat to move well was really the ultimate challenge at the back end of my career.
I've spoken to a few rowers. Drew Ginn is one, and James Tompkins another, for Dashing Gowns Olympic Adventures for Aussie Home Loans, and the great Kim Brennan is my guest today. And they said that, and Drew actually said he had Duncan Free in the boat with him when he won a gold medal in 2008. And Duncan was predominantly a sculler, Kim, who then became a sweep rower, and he had to learn how to basically row again. Did you have to learn how to row again, or by working, as you say, with the great Peter Anthony for a while, you were ready to go into the sculls when it was time?
Yeah, they're quite different. I mean, every boat has its own nuances in how you get it to work. And I mean, I typically would sit in the bow end of a boat. So I was a bow seat in the double scull, and I'd sit in the middle of the boat in a 4 or a quad, and the middle of an 8. And one of the things with rowing is there's not a correct way to row, but you need to row together. So you need to work out how to get that boat moving well together. So there are some real differences with that in the mechanics of how a sweep boat moves, and how you get the blade in the water, and how you really learn to leverage the boat between sweep and sculling. But I think you also can't underestimate how different sculling boats are to each other as well. How you row a quad being quite punchy and dynamic and upright, compared to how you'd row a double being really long and fluid and rhythmical, and letting the boat run out between strokes. And then, the ability to change how you row a single depending on the conditions. Is it a howling tailwind and you can let the boat do a lot more work and run between strokes, or is it a headwind where it's slowing down a lot and you've really got to keep the bow out of the water? And so, yes, absolutely, there is a relearning between sweep and scull, but also a relearning depending on who is in a boat with you, and how to get the most out of the other people in your crew.
3 short years after you'd started your rowing career, you found yourself in the Olympic Games in 2008. Was it ahead of expectations for you, Kim?
No, I mean, I think I think even though in hindsight it feels like not that much time, I mean, that's a lot of training sessions that fitted in between when I started and by the time the Beijing Olympics rolled around. I mean, the year before the Beijing Olympics, raced in both the pair and the 8 at the World Championships and had good results there. And I think it was by that time, something that I maybe didn't appreciate as much as I should have at the time. I think early in my career, I was lucky to be able to, train a lot and not get particularly injured. I think as you get older and your body starts to break down a little bit, you look back and you wish that you had have taken more advantage of when you're at your sort of physical peak back in the day. But I think, my mental and emotional peak followed many years after my physical peak early in my career.
Kim Brennan is my guest for Dashing Gowns Olympic Adventures podcast for Aussie Home Loans. They deal with anyone in Australia. They've got clients in every state and capital, and they do Zoom as well. See, you made the B final in the 2008 women's pairs. Were you happy with that, or did you feel you underachieved a bit?
Yeah, no, it was a really, really disappointing result, actually. So we had, had a really good year the year before in the pair. We'd won a World Cup. We led the World Championships final much of the race the year before. And then Olympic year, I think, again, lack of maturity. But, I went into the Games injured and had been injured for a good patch of the lead in. My pair partner was also injured. And I think we didn't perform anywhere near what our potential was, and I think a really, really great learning experience in taking more accountability for outcomes. I think at that time there was a lot of, as an athlete, you do what you're told, but realising that ultimately it's your life and it's your result and you're the one that creates it. And I look back and there were times when, I knew I was on the cusp of getting injured and I should have spoken out, and there were things that we needed to do to be performing well that we weren't doing. And I think realising that ultimately this is a big commitment that you make, and you need to be able to sit on the start line of those big races and believe that you deserve it. And you can only believe that you deserve it if you've truly done everything within your power and your capability to be in the shape of your life and be as prepared as you can be for it. And that's certainly not how we felt sitting on the start line of that final. So it was pretty disappointing, but it was also a really important learning experience that I think changed the course of the next couple of Olympiads.
What was the injury? And in hindsight, you've almost sort of answered this question. Did it help you become more mentally stronger and more mature for upcoming Olympic Games and more hungry to have success?
Yeah. Look, I mean, it's always hard to do the, who would you have become if things had have worked out differently. It was I had tendinitis, so I actually raced the Olympics in a wrist brace, which was not ideal. But I think it did teach me a lot. And I think this is true for anything in life. You when you have adversity or setbacks or things go wrong, at the time it feels pretty awful, and you work through a lot of emotions and you work through a lot of learning. There's anger, there's grief, there's disappointment, there's a whole lot of things going on. But what you do learn, the more adversity that you face, is the fact that there is light at the end of the tunnel, and you look back on it and realise that nothing is ever as bad as it seems at the time. And the learning that you get through those challenges that actually does make you stronger than had you not gone through it. So being able to have, at least at the back of your mind, when things do go wrong, that, this is a good thing. This is okay. This is making me better. And I think that attitude really has served me well right through my career. I mean, if we fast forward to the Rio Olympics and the heat the conditions blowing up just as I was sitting on the start line and being out there in the wrong boat and having a really difficult first race at the Rio Olympics, and without anyone needing to persuade me of this, crossed that line and thought, this is so great, isn't this great? This happened in the heat, didn't happen in the final, got all these opportunities to fix it now. This is a good thing. This is going to make me better. And to be so practiced in that ability to bounce back from adversity, I think, is a really important part of being an elite athlete, but also just life in general.
When you say you're in the wrong boat, what the boat that you hadn't trained in, you're in a different boat for the race in the heat?
So I actually took 2 single sculls into Rio. One was the boat that I liked. So it was a very sort of banana-shaped boat, which means that it picked up speed quite rapidly. It was a lot smaller, and it was just sort of a twitchy boat, so kind of like your greyhound or your thoroughbred sort of boat. And then I had another boat that was bigger, wider, more stable, which was for rough water. Because we knew Rio could get really rough. Now, when I got on the water for the heat, it was glass. The water, there wasn't a ripple on the water. So I took out the good water boat, so for rowing in flat water. But between the time of getting on the water and the race starting, the wind had blown up and the course there were waves breaking across the rowing course. There were a number of people who fell in and didn't finish races during the heat that happened then. But ultimately, the boat was full of water and was very difficult to row.
Did you feel after that race that you'd got through it, that, in the words of Starship, nothing's going to stop me now?
Oh, I thought, thank goodness this happened. This happened in the heat. But I mean, interestingly, later that afternoon, I went back out and had another row. I was the only rower of the entire, Olympic cohort that got back on the water that afternoon. And it was just that feeling of, yep, it's going to be okay. That was as bad as it's going to get. And just realising that I'd got an opportunity through that, and I rowed the other boat for the rest of the Olympic rowing regatta just to be safe.
3-time Olympian, and she's won a gold medal, silver medal and bronze medal in rowing. Kim Brennan has joined me on Dashing Games Olympic Adventures podcast for Aussie Homeline. Just back to changing from the sweep rowing to the sculls, that happened after the 2008 Olympics. Did you decide to do that because, as you said a bit earlier, you felt you were a better, or you had the potential to be a better scull rower, and you joined forces with Kerry Hoare, and you were pretty successful in world championships and the like? How long did it take for you guys to gel as a team?
I think, the interesting thing with Australian rowing is we do selection trials each year. We actually had a group of really strong scullers around that time: Sally Keogh, Kerry Hoare, Brooke Prattley. There were others as well. And so we would row all combinations through the domestic season and then go through selection trials and get put in various combinations of boats, and so raced double sculls internationally with Sal, Kerry and Brooke, and they were all great combinations. And I think they've all got different dynamics and different strengths, and working out how to row those combinations together as well as possible is part of the fun of being on a rowing team. But yeah, it was a really, we had a great squad for that Olympiad. Really strong women who pushed each other at training every day. And as a result, we did get some good results across those regattas as well.
And then, of course, Brooke was with you in the Olympic Games. Obviously, you knew each other well, so it didn't take you long to be able to gel together and go on to win a silver medal. Were you confident you could win a medal in the 2012 Games in London, which, of course, were dominated by the British, and there was an outstanding atmosphere out there on the water, wasn't it, Kim?
Yeah, it was incredible. It was actually so Brooke had won the World Championships previously, a few years previously, with Liz Kell, another wonderful sculler, and we had been through some pretty rigorous selection trials. Brooke and I were chosen as the double scull, but we found out just after getting selected that Brooke had actually broken her rib, which is quite a serious injury in rowing. So she was out of action, and we weren't sure whether she would be back in time for the games. It was quite a severe fracture, and she was unable to do much training at all. She certainly wasn't able to row. And so that was the reason that year I went to the final qualification regatta in the single scull, essentially as a backup plan. If Brooke wasn't back in time to race the double, the other women had been selected in a quad scull and they didn't want to disrupt that boat. Australia hadn't qualified the single at that point. So I went and raced at the final qualification regatta, qualified the single scull for the Olympics, and ended up racing in both boats at the games. But Brooke was incredible. So she'd only been back in the boat for a matter of weeks before those games, and her ability to just, jump in and that boat to really hum was quite exceptional. So I think, we were up against one of the best double sculls ever to have boated. The British crew were phenomenal, and we were actually thrilled with our race too at the games to win the silver medal there.
And you had to compartmentalise, Kim. I've got a feeling you're very good at doing that with what you've achieved since your rowing career as well, because you had the single sculls and you got a bronze medal. What a magnificent Olympic Games it was for you.
Yeah, it was it was it was a whirlwind experience, and yeah, it was wonderful to have those two races and get that done. I think having not spent that much time in a single scull in the lead up, I think it was enough for me with Brooke retiring to sort of say, all right, let's give the scull 4 years and see what I can do by the Rio Olympics.
Did you have to adjust anything being out in the water on your own, or at the end of the day, there's an old saying, if it is to be, it's up to me? Was it a bit easier again, just concentrating on things yourself?
Yeah, I think it was. I mean, we had the opportunity for a lot more planning. So to sort of really break up the Olympic cycle around, taking the time to go back to some of the basics that I'd never really learnt. Like I was very quick to, move from never having rowed before to being in, the Australian 8. But then you just don't, some of the things that people learn when they're learning to row about just sort of skills and drills and balancing the boat and rowing in all conditions, there was a little bit of taking the time to go back to the art of rowing that I think was important for me. I think the other thing that was important for me in those 4 years was, I had great training squads. That was always really critical to have other people around me to push me and keep it interesting. But I also still rowed in a lot of crew boats. So we had the men's sculling team training out of the same location, and I'd often jump into the men's quad, which was a really good chance for me to sort of test my skills and faster moving boat and make sure I was continuing to learn as I went, and it was probably good for them to have a spare as well.
And you married another Olympic Games gold medalist in rowing in Scott Brennan not long before the 2016 Olympics, 30th of December 2015, if you don't mind me saying. And obviously that helped as well. I mean, how much assistance did Scott give you in regard to preparing you for 2016, or did he just let you do your own thing?
No, I mean, he's always been absolutely amazing and a huge inspiration and mentor. I mean, he had a really tough experience at the 2004 Olympic Games, and watching his journey from 2004 to 2008 made me this kind of the blueprint for what was possible post Beijing. And he has a really sort of maturely wise and philosophical approach to life and to rowing, and to understanding how to get the most out of yourself and your crew and work together in teams. And it was, I was so lucky to have someone to really sort of guide me along the way.
Can I just ask you also about 2004? That was sadly the Sally Robbins controversy, Kim. It seems like Australian rowing, it dogged them for a little while, but we've moved on from that. Now, I don't know Sally personally. I don't know the other girls personally that are in that crew, but that was pretty tough for a while. But it seems, to use the word you've used a lot in this interview today for Dashing Down's Olympic podcast for Aussie Home Loans, and Aussie Home Loans have over 25 lenders on their panel, that everyone's a lot more mature now. Do you think that's accurate?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think the sport has gone through a few evolutions, and has developed along the way. I mean, we've had some really incredible individuals come through the sport of rowing. I think in recent years there has been a much more professionalised training model, and I think there were sort of fluctuations of that during my years in the sport. But what I was always fortunate for is just the wealth of experience and knowledge that we had access to in the sport of rowing. So you take Drew, James Tompkins, Scotty and Crouch, Kate Slatter and Megan Steele, Peter Anthony, just so many champions who are all very different and bring very different ideas. A lot of very well read, well thought, like lots of ideas and wisdom, and the things to challenge your thinking and approaches. So you're always looking for different ways of approaching problems and improving and becoming better. And I think that culture in the sport has really come a long way over many years. Yeah.
Victorians are powerhouses in rowing. Why do you think?
I think there's something really, really unique about the Yarra River and the boathouses there, and there's a real great team culture of heading down for a coffee at South Bank after the rowing, and the ability to sort of just ride down Flinders Street to the universities, and the real team aspect and proximity that you get on the Yarra is quite special. And if you're learning to row as a school kid, you're rowing on the same water as the Olympians, and you get to see them every day, and I think that is a special part of the sport. I think as a country more broadly, just Australians tend to be good at water sports. We're great swimmers, we're great kayakers, we're great sailors, we're great rowers, surfers as well.
Yeah, correct. You went to Wrighton. I went to Xavier. I didn't have the sporting gene at all, but the private schools are massive in this state, in Victoria, for obviously promoting and developing rowing. How much has that helped, do you think, making Victoria strong in rowing?
I think it does. I mean, I'm a big believer in not specialising too early in sport. I mean, I didn't row at school. Lots of people who didn't professionalise in a particular sport too early. I think there's a lot to be learned and gained from trying your hand at a lot of different things, whether it's sport or music or debating or whatever you try in your life to become more rounded and challenged in different ways. But I do think the opportunity to be able to try a range of sports is very strong in Melbourne. I mean, not living in Melbourne anymore, and you can see the difference of how much culture and life revolves around sport in Melbourne. You go to the footy on a Friday night, you then go and hang out when your family's playing for the local, Williamstown football team and those kind of things, which is quite uniquely Melbourne, that I think in some ways you don't realise until you go and live somewhere else, and life is less centred around sport day in, day out.
It certainly is. Well, you are a Melbourne girl and you're from a sporting family. Your brother Justin played a game at Collingwood. He's had a very successful career, though, as a high-performance manager at Collingwood and with Melbourne Victory. Your dad, 200 games, over 200 games of league footy, Max Crow with Essendon, and then with the mighty Western Bulldogs or Footscray and then St Kilda. And your mum, in a lot of ways, Kim, was a trailblazer when it came to women's sport. She's done a lot to put women's sport on the map as an administrator, hasn't she?
Yeah, she really has. You know, she was at the helm of women's cricket when it became Women's Cricket Australia. She's led softball, she's led Netball Victoria, and more recently Melbourne Heart, all the way until it became Melbourne City, and has given so much to sport. And I think, I mean, I've been fortunate to grow up in a family where I've had all the opportunities you could ever want to become a sports person and enjoy sport and the community that sport is.
Kim Brennan is my guest on Dashing Dan's Olympic Adventures. She won the gold medal in the 2016 Single Sculls at the Rio Olympics. We're here for Aussie Home Loans. You deal with anyone in Australia. They've got clients in every state and capital. They do Zoom as well, as Kim and I are doing with this podcast today. Now, Kim, to the final. You led from start to finish, almost a perfect race.
Yeah, it was a great race. I think, you know, when I look back, I expected to be incredibly nervous on the start line of the Olympic Games, but the reality was by the time it was time to go, I was incredibly calm because I felt so prepared. I knew exactly what it was that I needed to do. I had practiced, you know, how I'm going to think, how I'm going to feel, what I actually need to do on the day. And there was almost this, you know, freedom of, thank goodness it's finally here, and the opportunity to race that final that I knew that I had in me. So it was, you know, it was like being in a bubble for the majority of the race, just sort of popping out, you know, sort of last few hundred metres of, okay, no mistakes now, let's get across the line, and incredibly rewarding to get that right.
Did you won the world gold medal in 2013? You won the silver in 2014, then beat the Olympic champion 2015, Miroslava Napkova. So you must have gone in there as being pretty confident, but also you were probably the favourite. Were you wearing the favouritism badge lightly, or you'd forgotten about that?
I mean, I think it's the amount of pressure you put on yourself is always going to be more than any external pressure that might be on you. I knew what I was capable of, and I knew what it was that I needed to do. And, you know, what other people thought or what other people expected is probably less relevant than the clarity that I had around what it was that I needed to do on the day.
Lyle McCarthy, your coach, what makes him a great coach? I mean, I've spoken to both James and Drew about having the great Noel Donaldson in their camp for a long, long time. You had Lyle for a long, long time. Obviously, it worked beautifully, didn't it?
Yeah, he was wonderful. And I think one of the things that works so well is how different we are and how well our personalities actually complemented each other. And, you know, ironically, it was why we clashed so much when we first started working together. I mean, Lyle is, he's a creative genius. He's always thinking of new things in different ways. He's experimenting with oar shapes. He's, you know, installing different fins on the boat. He's, you know, thinking about new and crazy sessions. You know, my personality is a lot more, you know, okay, if we need to do 4100s, we'll do 4100s, and, you know, I'll go and get it done and I'll do it as well as I can, and what do I need to do better, and sort of that methodical approach. And I think you need a combination of those things. You need the disruption and the creativity and the challenge and the what else, and you also need the, you know, the huge volume and capacity of for work and for learning. And I think together we made a really good team and we had a lot of fun.
I couldn't imagine, Kim, you arguing with anyone. I probably don't know you well enough, do I?
Probably not.
So there used to be some battles with Lyle, but I suppose that's all part of the creative process, as you said.
Yeah, I think in the early days it was probably just a misunderstanding of each of us and why we were there and how we went about our business. And I think, you know, being able to communicate openly is really important. It's sort of, you know, minor things like I was studying full-time when I first started on the Australian rowing team, and it wouldn't be unusual for Lyle to be tinkering with boats. So we'd get on the water 5 hours after the time that we were meant to get on the water. And, you know, someone studying full-time, that was really hard. You know, I had classes to get to and I had things to do. And so if training got pushed back, then, you know, your day gets thrown out, and I didn't like that. But I also didn't really communicate to Lyle the impact that was having on me, and he probably perceived that I wasn't as committed to rowing as he wanted. And I think sometimes those kind of things create perceptions of one another that are not actually accurate. And so I think that the more we got to know each other and know that we wanted to go to the same place and we desperately wanted to go there, and that it was really important that we were really open and transparent in how we thought about things and how things impacted us. And then we ended up having a really good routine and really fantastic working relationship and an enduring friendship.
You never thought of changing coaches at all?
No, Lyle, it was a real team. And, you know, I might have been the one in the boat, but there was so much that went into that was a joined effort. And I absolutely couldn't have done it without Lyle.
And having won that gold medal in 2016, did you know the end was nigh, or did you have plans to maybe go on again? I know your son Jude was born in 2018, and that obviously changed everything, but you did retire in 2018. But were there plans?
I was pretty confident I was going to retire after Rio, but I didn't want that weighing on me at the Olympic final, that would be, you know, have to think about not only it being the Olympic final, but the last rowing race I'd do. So I didn't make the decision at that time. But then, you know, a couple of years passed and I got annoyed with drug testers knocking on my door and realised I wasn't really training and I had no desire to go back to rowing. So thought I should make it formal.
Fair enough. Now, you were chair of the Athletes Commission of the Australian Olympic Committee. What did that entail? You did that for 5 years, and has that helped you in regard to your life, your professional life outside sport?
Yeah, I mean, it was a great learning experience, you know, a real honour to chair the Athletes Commission. I think, you know, it was a period of sport going through a lot of change, of athletes finding their voice and having opinions on things, you know, moving from an era where, you know, athletes were kind of expected to just toe the party line and, you know, be wonderful sort of assets for their sports, to, you know, a world where athletes, you know, were grown up, accountable individuals with opinions and points of view, and it was a period of change and, you know, hugely challenging time as well. So I also sat on the AOC executive board at that time, and a great opportunity to learn a lot more about governance and the politics of getting decisions made and how do we influence change, and how, you know, big complex ecosystems work. And, you know, I was never naive as an athlete that there was this big machine that sits behind the ability to compete. But it was a really great way to see ways to have an impact beyond the sporting field.
What did you learn about John Coates being on the AOC executive that you didn't already know, Kim?
I mean, John has always been a really strong leader and obviously supporter of rowing, being the sport that he comes from. And I mean, his leadership style and his ability to influence change at the highest levels. And I mean, the Brisbane Olympics is a fascinating example of he would have been strategically plotting and organising that years before it even occurred to anyone else. And so his political genius is second to none, and has given so much of his life to the world of sport. And I mean, I think what you learn pretty quickly is that there are a whole lot of different personality styles out there, and there are elements of personalities that jar, and you may not agree with everything that people think but we have so many people in sport whose hearts are in the right place, and working out how to harness that energy towards outcomes that meet a whole lot of things that are actually really hard. When you've got complex problems and you've got a whole lot of entities, you've got a federation, and there are a lot of things that are hard, and change is hard. But I think there are a lot of people doing their best to make the sporting world a better place.
And just before I let you go, I know and I really appreciate your time on Dashing Downs Olympic Adventures for Aussie Home Loans. You were going to go as the Deputy Chef de Mission to the 2020 Games in Tokyo. They got put back a year because of the pandemic, and your daughter came along, who's now 3 years old. Do you harbour ambitions when your children are a little bit older to maybe go down that path again and be a chef de mission or a deputy chef de mission, because you've obviously got plenty to offer?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say. I mean, I still love sport. I sit on the Australian Sports Foundation board and incredibly passionate about that. But you also, having kids, it opens up a whole new world and, new job that I love and, different world that I inhabit now. And so what the future holds, I don't really know, but I've always taken an approach of being very open-minded to the things that I'll have a go at. And so I think I'll just see what the next 5, 10, 15 years offers.
Would you like your kids to be rowers, Kim?
Probably not.
Probably not? No.
I'd just like them to enjoy sport. If they want to take up rowing, I absolutely will support them to do so. But I think, it's going to be tough for them, and the pressure that potentially will be placed on them because of their parents. And no one is good at sport when they start. No. It's something that everyone has to learn, and I just want them to have the opportunity to be able to learn and enjoy sport for the joy that it can bring, rather than be focused on success or results or anything like that.
You don't think people are born with an innate ability in some sports where they're just naturally gifted from the word go to play a specific
I think
sport?
people have attributes and mindsets and natural talent, absolutely. But that's just a starting point. That's not what makes a champion. You still need to train, you still need to learn, you still need to harness that. And I think there are very few examples of people who are truly just, born that way and don't have to work for it. I think some people put on a front that they don't need to work for it, but I think the majority of high achievers are able to focus themselves and train themselves and learn in ways that turns that natural talent into something so much more.
And who do you follow in the footy? Essendon, St Kilda or Footscray? Essendon, fair enough. Your old man did play for 200 games, so I would have thought. You'd go for them. Kim, I really appreciate you joining us. One of the all-time greats of Australian rowing, won a silver in the Double Sculls, a bronze in the Single Sculls at the 2012 Olympic Games, and a gold in the Single Sculls at the 2016 Games. Kim Brennan has joined me on Dashing Downs Olympic Adventures podcast for Aussie Home Loans. Areas of expertise include purchasing a property, owner-occupied or investment, building a property portfolio, refinancing, debt consolidation, cash out construction, pre-approvals, first home buyers, equipment loans, car loans and personal loans. Thanks again for your time, Kim.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.